A widow's courage can shift the tides of fate. In 1876, Mara Collins, a young mother haunted by loss, carves a solitary life in the unforgiving Indian Territory, where blood stains the earth as often as rain. One fateful day, a desperate act of mercy at the thundering San Pedro Falls binds her to Táhan, a Comanche leader marked for death, a choice that unearths secrets tied to her husband's murder. Will their shared scars forge a bond stronger than vengeance, or unravel a truth too dangerous to face? Subscribe now, share where you're listening from, and uncover the mystery hidden in the wind's whisper. Stay until the end. Some oaths change everything. The sun bled red over the Indian Territory, 1876, painting the jagged scar of land between Texas and Oklahoma with a cruel glow. Mara Collins trudged through the canyon's dust, her infant son slung tight against her back, his soft breaths a faint anchor in the silence. Her boots crunched on brittle stone, each step heavy with the weight of a life stripped bare. Her husband, a dirt-poor homesteader, had been gunned down in a bounty hunt gone wrong, his blood soaked into this same unforgiving earth. Now, Mara survived on herbs plucked from the wild and the occasional rabbit snared with trembling hands, her heart walled off from the world. A distant crack of gunfire snapped her head up. Then another, sharp as a whip, echoing from the direction of San Pedro Falls. The roar of water followed, a low growl that seemed to rise from the earth's throat. Mara froze, her pulse hammering. Namu, the Comanche called this place, where the wind carried the dead's whispers. She should have turned back, but something raw, like a splinter under skin, pulled her toward the sound. She tethered her mare to a mesquite stump and crept forward, the baby's weight steadying her. Through the canyon's mouth, she saw the falls, a white curtain of water thundering down, mist rising like ghosts. Behind it, shadowed against the spray, knelt a man, hands bound, head bowed. 3 bounty hunters circled him, their silver badges glinting like vultures' eyes. One, a wiry man with a tobacco-stained grin, pressed a pistol to the captive's gut. Clean corpse, better pay, he sneered, thumbing the hammer. Mara's breath caught. The bound man was Táhan, a Comanche leader she'd heard whispered about in trading posts, a renegade with a price on his head, big enough to buy a ranch. His dark hair clung wet to his sharp-boned face, blood streaking his torn shirt. The hunters laughed, their voices grating like gravel under a wagon wheel. Mara's fingers tightened on her bow, her husband's death flashing hot in her mind. Tied like this, mocked like this, left to rot without a chance to fight. No time to think. She swung the baby's sling tighter, mounted her mare, and spurred it straight into the falls. Ice-cold water slammed her skin, soaking her to the bone, the roar swallowing her heartbeat. Hidden in the mist, she nocked an arrow, iron-tipped, forged by her husband's hands in better days. Her first shot pierced the wiry man's chest. He crumpled like a rag. The second arrow found the next hunter's throat before he could draw. The third man spun, firing blindly. A bullet grazed Mara's shoulder, hot pain blooming as blood mixed with the fall's spray. She burst through the curtain of water, her mare rearing. The last hunter stumbled, raising his gun, but Mara was faster. She leaped from the saddle, tackling him into the mud. Her short knife flashed, pinning his sleeve to the earth an inch from his throat. "Run!" she hissed, her voice sharp as flint. "Tell him a woman's scarier than your bounty." He scrambled up, boots slipping, and fled into the canyon's shadow. Mara cut Táhan's ropes, her hands shaking from pain and adrenaline. He staggered to his feet, eyes dark and unreadable, like storm clouds over the prairie. "You saved a killer," he rasped, voice barely rising above the falls. "Why?" She met his gaze, her shoulder throbbing, blood dripping down her arm. Because I didn't save the man I loved. Her voice cracked, but she held steady. Táhan swayed, exhaustion carving lines deeper into his face. Then, a glint caught Mara's eye. A silver badge on the dead hunter's vest, identical to the one her husband wore when he rode with the Border Patrol. A buried memory clawed free. Her husband hadn't died in a mistake. He'd been betrayed. Táhan's gaze locked on hers, his voice low, cutting through the water's roar. I know who killed your man. Her vision blurred, not from the wound, but from the weight of his words. The baby wailed, a piercing cry that mingled with the thunder of the falls. Mara's knees buckled, blood loss dragging her down. Táhan caught her, his own strength faltering, and together they stumbled from the rocks, the infant screams echoing in the storm's breath. The canyon's shadows swallowed Mara and Táhan as they stumbled from San Pedro Falls, her infant's cries fading into the storm's rumble. Blood seeped from her shoulder, each step a battle against the dizziness pulling at her edges. Táhan, barely upright himself, gripped her arm, his breath ragged but steady, guiding them through the dark until the world blurred into silence. Mara woke to the scent of sage and smoke, her body heavy on a bed of woven grass. The air was thick with the musk of buffalo hide and the faint crackle of a fire. Her son slept in a cradle of softened leather, his tiny chest rising under a patchwork blanket. She was in a Comanche camp, hidden deep in a cleft of red rock, where the wind sang low through the crags. Her shoulder throbbed, bound tight with herbs that stung her nose, the wound cleaned and stitched by hands she hadn't seen. She reached for her boy, her heart easing at his warmth, but her eyes darted to the figures moving beyond the firelight. Silent, watchful, their gazes sharp as arrowheads. Táhan sat across the camp, his own wounds bandaged, his face half lit by the flames. He carved a piece of cedar with a small knife, his movements slow but precise, like a man measuring his own survival. The Comanche around him kept their distance, their murmurs low, as if Mara's presence, a white woman who'd spilled blood for their leader, was a riddle they couldn't solve. An older woman, her braids streaked with gray, brought Mara a clay bowl of corn porridge. "Eat," she said through a young translator, her eyes wary but not unkind. "You're no ghost yet." Mara sipped the warm gruel, her mind clawing at Táhan's words from the falls. "I know who killed your man." The memory of that silver badge burned behind her eyes, a splinter of truth she couldn't dislodge. She wanted to demand answers, but her body was too weak, her tongue too heavy. Instead, she watched Táhan, his silence louder than the fire's snap. Each night, he traced a circle of embers around the camp, a ritual that felt like a prayer to the land itself. The flames danced in his eyes, but they always drifted west, toward some unseen weight. Days bled into one another, the camp a rhythm of survival. Mara learned to spark fire with flint, her hands clumsy but stubborn, guided by the old woman's curt nods. She listened to children laugh as they wrestled with oversized bows, their joy a stark contrast to the stories she'd heard of Comanche savagery. These were people, not shadows, mothers who sang to their young, men who sharpened spears with the same care they used to braid their daughters' hair. Yet the camp's edges bristled with tension. Every rustle in the brush set warriors scanning the horizon, their hands never far from their knives. One moonless night, Mara caught Táhan alone, etching a symbol into a scrap of hide, a jagged line crossed with 3 dots, chillingly like the badge she'd seen. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "What's that mark? You said you knew who killed my husband. Speak plain, Táhan." He stilled, his knife hovering, then met her gaze, his eyes dark as the night beyond the fire. "Some truths cut deeper than bullets," he said. "Wait for the wind to speak first." Her jaw tightened, frustration simmering, but his silence was a wall she couldn't breach. The next dawn, as she mended a tear in her son's blanket, she found a scrap of paper tucked in her saddlebag, its edges frayed, the ink faded, but legible. San Pedro, 1874. They sold him, the year her husband died. No signature, no explanation, just a ghost of a secret that made her blood run cold. Had Táhan left it? Or someone else in the camp, watching her closer than she knew? As her strength returned, Mara prepared to leave. The old woman pressed a pouch of dried herbs into her hand, muttering words the translator didn't share. Táhan approached, his steps quiet as a coyote's. He held out a sliver of pine bark, its surface rough against her palm. "Burn this when you need me," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "The wind knows your face now." Mara nodded, the weight of the paper and the bark anchoring her to a promise she didn't fully trust. She mounted her mare, her son secure against her chest, and rode into the dawn, the camp's fires fading behind her. The canyon stretched wide, its silence louder than the falls, whispering of truths still buried in the dust. The canyon's silence clung to Mara as she rode from the Comanche camp, her son's warmth against her chest, a quiet tether to hope. The pine bark and cryptic note. San Pedro, 1874. They sold him, burned in her pocket, heavy as a loaded pistol. Dawn broke over Namu, painting the horizon in streaks of fire, but the promise of answers felt like chasing shadows across the prairie. 2 months later, in the late summer of 1876, Mara's cabin stood weathered but defiant, its timbers baked by the relentless sun. She knelt in the dirt, tending a patch of sage, her broken world stitched together by routine, her son's laughter, the creak of the porch, the rhythm of survival. But the air carried a new weight, like the stillness before a storm. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance, too many, too fast. Mara's hand froze on her trowel, her pulse quickening. She scooped her boy into her arms and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the dust rising from the west. 5 bounty hunters rode up, their faces hard as flint, spurs glinting like spurs of a rattlesnake. The leader, a man with a scar splitting his brow, dismounted, holding a tattered leather cap. Mara's dropped at the falls during Táhan's rescue. "You helped a killer escape," he growled, his voice like gravel under boots. "That Comanche dog's worth more than your life, widow." Mara's jaw tightened, the note's words flashing in her mind. She clutched her son, his small hands gripping her sleeve. "You're on my land," she said, voice steady as iron. "Leave." The scarred man laughed, sharp and mean. "We'll leave when you tell us where he's hiding." He nodded to his men, who fanned out, their boots kicking up red dust. One struck a match, and before Mara could move, flames licked the cabin's walls, the dry wood catching like kindling. Her heart lurched as smoke curled skyward, her home crumbling into ash. A hunter snatched her son from her arms, his cries piercing the air. Mara lunged, but a fist cracked against her temple, sending her to her knees. "Talk," the leader snarled, "or the boy pays." Pain seared her skull, but Mara's eyes burned hotter. "You'll hunt something bigger than money if you touch him," she spat, her voice raw as a blade. The hunter raised his fist again, and this time, bone snapped. Her left arm broke under the blow, the pain white-hot, stealing her breath. She laughed, a dry, defiant sound. "You'll see." The hunters exchanged glances, unnerved by her fire, but they tied her to a fence post, her son's wails fading as they dragged him toward their horses. Night fell, the stars cold and sharp above the smoldering ruins. Mara's arm throbbed, blood crusting her sleeve, but her mind clung to one thing: the pine bark in her pocket. With her free hand, she clawed it out, her fingers trembling as she struck a flint against the post. The bark caught, a thin wisp of smoke curling into the black sky, carrying her plea to the wind. She slumped against the wood, her strength fading, the note's words echoing. They sold him. Was this her husband's fate, repeated in her own? If you're gripped by Mara's fight, folks, hit that subscribe button. It keeps these stories alive, and I'd love to know where you're listening from. Your support carries us through the dust and fire of this tale. 3 days crawled by, each hour a knife twisting in her gut. The hunters camped nearby, their laughter grating as they drank and planned to sell her son for leverage. Mara's voice was gone, her throat raw from shouting, but her eyes never left the horizon. On the third dawn, a red wind stirred, heavy with the scent of earth and vengeance. Hoofbeats rumbled, not from the trail, but from the west, like a pulse rising from the land itself. Shadows moved in the haze, dozens of Comanche warriors, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun, spears glinting like fangs. Táhan rode at their head, his cloak stained with rain, his face carved from stone. The hunters scrambled, drawing iron, but the Comanche formed a circle, their torches flaring to life, trapping the camp in a ring of fire. No shots rang out, only the low chant of voices, steady as a heartbeat, cutting through the dawn. Táhan dismounted, his knife flashing as he cut Mara's ropes. He pressed her son into her arms, the boy's warmth flooding her with relief. "You saved me with blood," he said, his voice low, like the wind over the plains. "I pay with 36 cattle, one for each season I owe you." Mara clutched her son, tears mixing with the dust on her face. "I got no pasture," she rasped, a broken laugh escaping her. Táhan's eyes held hers, unyielding. "Build one." He turned, mounting his horse, and the warriors vanished into the haze, leaving a herd of lowing cattle and a stunned silence in their wake. The dust settled over Namu, the lowing of 36 Comanche cattle fading into the dawn as Táhan and his warriors vanished into the haze. Mara stood amidst the ruins of her cabin, her son clinging to her neck, his small body warm against her battered frame. Her broken arm throbbed, bound only by a makeshift sling, but the weight of the pine bark in her pocket and the cryptic note. San Pedro, 1874. They sold him, burned hotter than her pain. The cattle, a debt repaid, grazed the scorched earth, their presence a challenge to rebuild from ash. By the spring of 1880, the San Pedro Valley whispered a new tale. Mara's ranch rose from the charred bones of her old life, its timbers hewn from mesquite and braced against the relentless wind. The cattle, branded with no mark but their wild Comanche spirit, roamed a pasture fenced by Mara's own hands, each post driven deep into the red dirt. Her son, now 4, darted through the grass, his laughter sharp as a lark's call, a small bow slung across his back, crafted by Mara from cedar, its string taut as her resolve. The townsfolk in nearby settlements spoke of her in hushed tones. The widow who tamed a herd no man dared touch, her land a fortress carved from grit. Each dawn, Mara worked the ranch alone, her arm healed but scarred, a reminder of the night her world burned. She mended fences under the searing sun, her hands calloused, her eyes scanning the horizon for threats that never came. The bounty hunters had scattered, their courage broken by the Comanche's fiery ring, their whispers of Mara's defiance spreading like wildfire. Yet the note's mystery gnawed at her. She kept it hidden in a tin box beneath her bed, its words a ghost she couldn't bury. Who had sold her husband? Was Táhan a keeper of secrets or a pawn in a larger game? One evening, as the sky bled gold, An old trader named Caleb rode up, his wagon creaking under the weight of salt and stories. He tipped his hat, his weathered face cracking into a grin. "Heard you got Comanche cattle," he said, eyeing the herd. "Ain't nobody fool enough to rustle 'em." Mara offered him water, her voice steady. "They're mine by right, earned in blood." Caleb nodded, his eyes glinting with something like respect, and left a gift, a small iron horseshoe. "For luck," he said, before rattling off into the dusk. The seasons turned, and Mara's ranch grew. Squash and beans sprouted in neat rows, their green a defiance against the arid land. Her son, whom she called Eli after her father, trailed her like a shadow, his questions endless. "Mama, why don't the men come here anymore?" he asked one day, tossing a pebble into the creek. Mara knelt beside him, her fingers brushing the turquoise beads she'd strung into his hair, a gift from the Comanche woman who'd bandaged her. "Because they know this land's got teeth," she said, her voice low, like the growl of the falls. But peace was a fragile thing. One night, a rider appeared at the edge of her land, his silhouette stark against the moon. Not a hunter, but a man in a tattered army coat, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. He left a parcel at the gatepost and vanished before Mara could reach him. Inside was a ledger page, its edges brittle, listing names and payments from 1874. Her husband's name was there, scrawled beside a sum and the words, "Delivered to San Pedro." Her blood ran cold. The badge, the note. Now this. Someone was peeling back the past, daring her to follow. Mara burned pine bark that night, the smoke curling thin and sharp into the stars. She didn't expect Táhan, but the ritual felt like a tether to the truth. The wind carried no answer, only the distant howl of a coyote. She sat by the creek, Eli asleep in the cabin, and turned the ledger page over in her hands. The names listed weren't Comanche but white men. Traders, soldiers, men of power. Her husband hadn't been a random casualty, he'd been a transaction. By summer, Mara's ranch was a beacon. Travelers stopped for water, leaving stories instead of threats. A preacher offered to bless her land. She declined, pointing to the cattle. "They're my blessing," she said, her voice hard as flint. The falls roared nearby, their mist a constant whisper, and sometimes, in the quiet, Mara swore she heard hoofbeats. She never saw Táhan, but the smoke she sent up each rainy season was her oath, a signal that she'd carry the weight of their shared debt, even as the truth about her husband's death loomed like a storm on the horizon. The truth about her husband's death hung over Mara like a storm cloud, its shadow darkening the ranch she'd built from ash. Each night, as she burned pine bark by the creek, the smoke rose thin and sharp, a silent vow to carry the oath she'd made with Táhan, even as the ledger page, its names of traders and soldiers, whispered of a betrayal she couldn't yet unravel. The San Pedro Falls roared in the distance, their mist a constant echo of the past. By the summer of 1882, the Indian Territory had grown quieter, its trails worn by traders and wanderers who spoke of Mara's ranch in hushed awe. Old Caleb, the salt trader, sat by a campfire one night, his voice rough as gravel, weaving a tale that drew a small crowd of drifters and cowhands under the star-streaked sky of Namu. His eyes glinted, reflecting the flames, as he leaned forward, hands gnarled from years of hauling cargo across the plains. "Gather close," he said, his words curling like smoke. "This ain't no yarn spun for coin. It's the truth of a woman who built justice from dust and tears." Mara's name carried weight now, not just in San Pedro, but beyond, where the wind whispered of a widow who'd faced down death and won. Caleb recounted how her ranch stood firm, its fences unyielding, her 36 Comanche cattle a living testament, to a debt paid in blood. But the story he told wasn't just of survival. It was of a reckoning. One spring, a stranger had come to Mara's gate, not on horseback, but on foot, his boots caked with red dirt. He was no bounty hunter, but a former scout, his face lined with guilt, his hands trembling as he handed her a letter sealed with wax. "I was there," he'd said, voice breaking like dry wood. "In '74, at San Pedro. Your man wasn't killed by chance." The letter, written in a dying man's hand, named a captain in the Border Patrol, a man of wealth and power, who'd sold Mara's husband to settle a debt with a rival outfit. The scout had seen it, had carried the shame for years, and now sought absolution before the grave took him. Mara read the words under the flicker of a lantern, her son Eli asleep in the cabin, his small bow propped against the wall. Her hands shook, not with sorrow, but with a fury that burned like a prairie fire. The ledger page, the note, the badge, all pieces of a puzzle that now formed a name: Captain Harrow. She rode out at dawn, leaving Eli with a neighbor woman who'd grown to respect her. The trail to Harrow's estate was long, winding through canyons, where the wind howled like a mourner. Mara carried no weapon but her knife and the letter, its weight heavier than any gun. Harrow's house loomed, a gaudy fortress of stone and iron, its gates guarded by men who sneered at her dust-streaked figure. "State your business, widow," one spat. Mara's voice was cold as steel. "Tell Harrow his past is here." Inside, Harrow sat behind a desk, his uniform crisp, his eyes narrowing at the letter she thrust forward. "You've got no proof," he said, but his voice wavered, betraying the lie. Mara didn't flinch. "I've got enough to burn your name to ash," she said, her words sharp as a blade's edge. She didn't draw her knife, didn't need to. Her presence, forged in years of loss and defiance, was weapon enough. Harrow offered gold to silence her, but Mara turned away, leaving the letter on his desk. "Live with it," she said, and walked out, the guards parting like grass before a storm. Caleb's voice dropped low, the campfire crackling as his listeners leaned closer. "She didn't kill him," he said. "Didn't need to." Word of Harrow's betrayal spread, and by winter, he was gone. Run off, some say, or worse. Mara didn't chase vengeance. She let the truth do its work. The crowd murmured, their faces lit by the fire's glow, the story sinking deep like roots in fertile soil. Mara returned to her ranch, where Eli now practiced roping fence posts, his laughter a melody against the fall's roar. She burned pine bark each rainy season, the smoke a ritual that bound her to Táhan's oath, though she never saw him again. The wind carried no hoofbeats, but the cattle thrived, their numbers growing, a legacy of a debt repaid. Caleb finished his tale, his voice steady as stone. "In this hard land, guns settle scores, but only mercy pays the biggest debts. Mara didn't buy justice. She carved it with courage and tears." The fire died low, and the listeners scattered into the night, carrying Mara's story across the plains. By the falls, her ranch stood, a beacon of defiance, its smoke rising like a prayer to a land that never forgot. The tale of Mara and Táhan ends where the San Pedro Falls still roar, their oath woven into the wind of Namu. Your time with this story means the world, folks. It keeps the fire of these tales burning. Drop your thoughts below. What stirred you most about Mara's courage or Táhan's debt? Share where you're listening from, too. I love hearing from you all. Until the next story, when the plains call us back, keep the spirit of the frontier alive. See you by the next campfire.